Hi there and welcome to the 1014 Rugby, the global rugby community, and we're bringing you rugby content based on passion, integrity and respect. And today we've got Paul Wallace in the studio, Munster, Leinster legend. He was played for Saracens at the turn of the professional era, with that great Saracens side, all the way up through the Irish ranks. And then who could forget the 1997 Lions, the Lions tour, where Martin Johnson, the captain and legend, said that Paul Wallace was his player of the series. So welcome Paul.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Welcome, Paul, and of course all of that pales in significance to your Munster Schools Cup medals, which I'm sure are a pride of place over there for you.
Yeah, and having Gareth as a number 8 at school is probably even better still.
Exactly, yeah. Wally, we're looking at the Six Nations at the moment, and we'd love, to get a little window into your experience in that great competition. You started off in the Five Nations, and going back to the very start for us that haven't played at test level football, what's it like when you're standing out there in the anthems and you're realising your kid's dream, you're after achieving it, when you're in the stands in Twickenham or in the dressing rooms? Can you take it all in? What's the experience like when you're out there?
Yeah, it's before you get your first cap, it's a massive experience, especially back then when crowds wouldn't have been quite that big for provincial games, or if you're playing Ireland A or whatever it might be. So initially, I think it's the size of the crowd coming in, the atmosphere that you're playing. My first cap was during the World Cup in '95 against Japan in Bloemfontein, and that was it was a huge moment. Just the changing room and the nerves never quite go away. But before your first cap, God, they're huge. Just not wanting to leave anyone down, and it sort of builds from that. And I guess as your career goes on, you become more confident, and you just get to embrace those big occasions a bit more. But it's certainly a step up. The pace, the physicality goes up a bit from the highest level I've played previous to that. Luckily enough, I think the first 5 games I played, I won with Ireland, which back in the 90s was quite some record when we weren't doing quite so well, especially a few years later on. So I had a great introduction, and so it was a great start. My first Five Nations game was Wales at home, and I think I played against Fiji at home before that and scored a try in Lansdowne Road, which is a huge moment, and then going on and playing, it's definitely a huge step up again from those friendlies when you do play Five Nations. And Wales, who we had a great record against during my career, that was one of the games that we always seemed to really click against them. Even though they had some great players, I think psychologically we had something over them. But that was winning that game in Wales. And don't think I lost till we went to Twickenham away, and we actually had a good run at them until Will Carling, who was captain that day, sort of got injured, and they'd been playing an open game against us, and then they rolled up the sleeves, and Dean Richards and co were sort of put us away. But we said it's still a respectable performance against what was a good England team back then.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're naming these legends of the game, like Will Carling, Dean Richards. What's it like coming up against these people you would have seen on TV? No doubt you would have seen them growing up. And then also in the same sort of breath, what's it like going into an Irish camp with legends, that you would have, legends for you? Is it intimidating?
It certainly is. Lucky enough, my older brother Richard was in the Irish camp at the time and had been for a few years. Yeah. So I got to know, and I was playing Ireland A. So we would have been training against the senior team quite a bit, and I had a few years to wait. They didn't like blooding forwards, especially front row, too early in Ireland. So I think I was about 23, but I'd been around the scene from about 21. So you would have known a lot of the guys playing interprovincial as well. Ireland's a small place, but some of the greats at the time, like Simon Gagan and Nick Popplewell and players like that, just to come in and play with them rather than just train against them, was a huge step forward, and learned an awful lot very quickly with them.
Wally, would you get starstruck around any of these guys, or in a even when you went up to Lions level even? Like
I think
massive legends of the game. Like,
there's one thing when you're growing up in Ireland. I suppose when you go on a Lions tour, then there's guys like Jerry Guscott and Martin Johnson, players like that, who I wouldn't have known. Ian Evans, players who'd been around when I'd been in college watching the Lions play, or even in school, I think some of them maybe. It was. Coming in there, you are a bit shy. I was a bit older at that stage, about 25, so it was difficult. I think going to Saracens probably even more so. Philippe Sella, Michael Laine, Francois Pinard, players like that, real established stars of the game, and mixing with them. But when you've played with those guys, I suppose there's not much higher you can go. And they were. Privileged to play with them all, and I think you always respect your teammates. So whether they've 100 caps or uncapped, it's a little bit the same. And the further you go on, I guess the cheekier you get anyhow. So you take you give them a level of respect, but you have a bit of respect in your own ability as well.
Brilliant. Wally, we're talking about a lot at the moment about the difference and the step up from club European level to test rugby, and you went from provincial club rugby over in England, provincial in Ireland, club rugby England, European rugby, and then international right up to the Lions. You mentioned just quickly about the step of intensity and physicality. Can you tell us about it? I think Steve Hansen calls them test animals, Eddie Jones test animals, the particular kind of player at test level, and how different it actually is when you get up there to the high levels?
Yeah, well, I guess when you're playing back then, there's some very big physical size. Against the Celtic nations, we would have physically compared quite well, but when you're playing against the likes of France and England, the numbers of players they had to choose from, and what was a slower, probably more grinding physical game up front. They had real behemoths size-wise, and even though you might have a couple of guys, big physical players ourselves, like Jeremy Davison, players like that, Keith Wood, you always, as a pack, as an eight, the combined size was always that much bigger. And I remember playing against France, tackling Olivier Merle, who was 22 odd stone, and they and athletic at that as well, and. It all sort of turned around. It was just a different level, and it's you always play against teams, and they'll have one big physical athlete or two. But when you started playing those sides, or when the All Blacks or Australia came over on tour, they just had bigger, more physical players, and that was certainly a step up. It wasn't that you target one or two players; it was across the board, and that's probably the difference between Ireland, the Celtic nations over here, and France and England back then, was you might have sort of 4 or 5, top class internationals, 4 or 5 international class, but then we were always carrying a few. We had a pretty weak backline back then. I think the Irish game was much of a kicking game, and hence we normally do quite well and dominate a lot of teams. Whether it be Tri-Nations teams, or the England or France, but you could still be on a severe hiding on the scoreboard. Just their backline attack was so good.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And the thing that fascinates me possibly most about the Six Nations, Paul, is this home and away mentality. So you go away to France and you play France, particularly Ireland, and I didn't appreciate it till I sort of started hanging out with Gareth and saying that Ireland really struggle in Paris, and that's really foreign to me. Are you able to shed some light on that from a player's perspective, what that's like?
Yeah.
The home and away?
My first and only time playing over in Paris, we were 78 minutes in and we were still winning the game. It was in 1998. We'd have played them, France at home, in 96 and again 99, but 96 we'd have done quite well. It was quite close, but this time Warren Gatland had just taken over as coach. We brought in Mallow Kelly in the second row, Andy Ward, another New Zealander, in the back row. And we really took him to task. There was eye gouging straight away in the first 5 minutes in the scrums. So you knew you had the French on the back foot. Your eye might be half out of your head, but we knew we had them rattled, and went the whole way. Unfortunately.
So you were enjoying the odd eye gouge.
Yeah. Well, I'd learned from playing in France at various levels that Yeah, and that's probably one of the things, half the time you're not looking about where the ball's going, you're looking at what fellow was behind you, really kind of get it dumped in your head. It was quite filthy back then, it really was. And those boots flying, because, your touch judges, referees didn't really do too much, and you had to look after yourself pretty much. And the TV cameras weren't great. In fact, in that game, I had a disallowed try, which would have been the first Irish try in 25 years or something like that. But the referee had his back to a block down 22, and it showed on the screen that it was a perfect try. But TMO nowadays would have given it. So that was fairly disappointing. And we took, I think it was myself, Keith Wood and Paddy Johns were brought off with 2 minutes to go, and we messed up a line-out in our 22, and Ibanez went in and scored. So it was one of those games that got away. But for me, I was gone at 78 minutes when we were winning, so I'm taking that as a personal win in Paris.
Nice. Yeah. So the home and away thing, Paul, it's as Steve was saying, it's kind of a strange thing in the Six Nations, and it really matters. Even playing England in Twickenham, I'm sure is that a different beast to playing England in Dublin?
Yeah. Well, look, a lot of it's down to the crowd. Getting tickets for an away travelling team, you're lucky if you get 10%, 15% of the crowd. People, international weekends, generally have been lubricating themselves at various hostilleries on the way, and you get a very loud sort of crowd on match days, and such a huge social occasion. There's rugby is one thing, but for supporters, it's just a massive cultural. Where you have so many, will say, especially the Welsh, they travel to Ireland. You might have 10,000 that go to the game, and then you'd have another maybe 70, 80,000 all around Dublin and other cities that just come over to watch it. It's just a sort of a bonding of various nationalities, and that's reciprocated as well. So I think when you're playing, you have that big crowd, there, and some places like Scotland, we'd always have regarded ourselves as being a better 15 on paper, but we got awful results up there. And sometimes psychologically, you just get into a run of losing in some places. We couldn't but win in Cardiff, who were regarded as better than Scotland. We kept losing in Murrayfield. England and France at that stage were a bit ahead of us. So I didn't get to beat England away, which would have been obviously the best of the best. But had a couple of good runs there, and one pretty bad beating as well.
So when you're coming up against Wales, you mentioned France, and what you expect from France, particularly in France. Do you think there's traits for each country? Like, whenever you played against Wales, did you find them a similar kind of opposition most times, or Scotland? Does each country have a kind of a DNA or a trait to them? On a player.
Yeah, like France back then were playing very, very physical, very strong maul. Scrum was normally quite good, although we were, in that time we got the better of them probably, which is obviously when you go to Paris, the first thing you got to do is take on their scrum. But their backline, they had some amazing talents back then. They played some beautiful rugby. The depth they ran from, the pace, the power. Only New Zealand, I think, at that time would have been as good an attacking force when they got going. Then you've got, England, big physical, very disciplined, kicked their goals. They did everything right, and they just had that strength, everywhere. I think the discipline was the big thing, rather than the French that, as I mentioned there, once if you can get inside their heads early on, you've got a good chance of beating them, where the English are just that bit more difficult. And then Wales, psychologically some great players, but we always managed to turn them over. I think physically maybe dominated them a bit up front was back then, and then the Scots is the team that we should gone and done that, but they were always, especially in Murrayfield, very, very gutsy and very hard to break down. They kept coming back at you, and they played a high tempo game, which probably didn't suit us if we got into a slower mauling game against them, whereas against England we might want the tempo up. So it was you did vary your game depending on which side you were playing and where.
This is really interesting. It's coming through in this season, Six Nations as well. Very similar things to that. What's also similar to this is this is the season after the Lions and a hugely successful, massively successful Lions series down here in New Zealand. And in 1997, you went away and won in South Africa, which for a Kiwi is enormous. Like we've only ever won there once, a Test series over there, and we were watching that from here. Well, I certainly was watching you guys. But then you go back to the Six Nations or the Five Nations as it were, and you have played with Martin Johnson and all these legends, and then you have to come up against them. Or you go back to the Irish camp and you've just come back on this massive high. What does that feel like the year after? Because it's pertinent for this year.
Yeah, you make great friendships on a Lions tour. I think more than any tour, it's just exceptional because you spent 4 years beating lumps out of each other. And now we did back then there used to be a very social side post-match in the Six Nations, so you did get to know some players. But there's still huge rivalries. But when you go away on those tours, very old school, we all got out and enjoy ourselves, have a few beers, a lot of social activities. And, came back great friends for life. And as Ian McKeon would say, it's, you win with a Lions, that's it, you'll be friends for life. And, 20 years later, it's very much the case. You can see that especially with the support of teammate Doddy Weir, who's motor neurons disease, and the support from all the 97 Lions getting around him. So it is a huge thing, but I guess you grew up, I was playing at Saracens at the time, so I'd have been playing against England, against my club teammates, having been evicted to Leinster and playing against my brothers down in Munster. I'd been used to doing that. So I think in the profession in particular, you get used to playing against your friends, and I guess you probably you want to win even more because you don't want them having one over on you. Yeah.
You've touched, Paul, on old school traditions in the Six Nations being quite sociable, and can you tell us a little, was there traditions and things that you do with the opposition back in the day?
No.
Say if England came into town, would it be a set of traditions every year?
Yeah, the biggest one was the first cap, where it was called Benghazi, where you'd be sitting down with your partners, and then you'd have someone from the opposition team, and sort of maybe might be 10 at the table or 12 at the table, and there's 3 players and the partners from each team. And then you'd, if you had a first cap, and we had one, Austin Healy, sitting next to me, and what happens is you get one of the experienced players, so Keith Wood, the captain, came down and said, well done, your first cap, Austin, Benghazi, and pours him a glass of wine himself and sculls it. And Austin thinks this is great, the Irish captain coming down and saying this. And then 2 minutes later, Nick Popplewell comes over and does exactly the same. So 8 players later, and he's had to scull 8 glasses of wine. So I think we had him nicely put to sleep, and to have a quiet Austin Healy at the table is something to hold.
Was that an Irish tradition, Paul, or
no,
would the same have happened over in Wales?
No, pretty much everywhere. Yeah, no, we'd have got it as well. Luckily enough, I got my first cap during the World Cup when none of that was going on. So, but yeah, there's quite a few Irish players that, met their downfall as well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So, Paul, that's excellent, and we also want to thank your new twins, Paul, and your wife.
Thank you.
We kind of arranged this in different time zones, and
no worries.
It's now Valentine's Day in Ireland. So
what is it?
Thanks very much to the family.
You're Thursday morning there, are you?
It is, yeah. So we've had Valentine's last night.
All right. Were you very romantic?
I was, yeah.
Oh, look at this.
We're all romantic Irishmen, Paul, aren't we?
That's it, yeah. We're more romantic than the Kiwis, I'd say, are we?
I'd say so.
All right, Paul, thanks very much for this. It's been great to get an insight from a player's perspective.